Machine oil stuck to my skin, but today it felt heavier. I stared at the chaos I controlled. People ask how it ended. I say, after carrying the entire team, I watched the promotion go to my boss's son who couldn't read a production schedule. I resigned quietly. Within days, contracts started dropping. My boss ran around the floor panicking, yelling,
Where is he?
right as the board demanded a full explanation. The end was satisfying, but the beginning was just grease, noise, and sheer exhaustion. A red strobe light flashed near the packaging line. I didn't run. Running makes the new hires panic. I walked briskly, dodging a forklift that cornered too fast. The driver looked terrified, so I signaled him to slow down with a sharp gesture. The noise was a physical weight, a mix of grinding metal and hydraulic hisses. By the time I reached the packaging unit, 3 people were shouting over a jammed sensor. They stopped arguing and looked at me like I was a messiah holding a wrench. It's the optical eye, I said. I reached into the machinery, ignoring the heat off the motor. My fingers found the misaligned bracket by touch alone. One hard twist, a soft click, and the belt roared back to life. The crew cheered, but I didn't smile. This wasn't a victory. It was just Tuesday. I wiped a smudge of grease onto my rag. This place was held together by duct tape and my refusal to go home. I wondered if anyone upstairs knew my last name. My lower back throbbed in rhythm with the stamping press. I checked my watch. Shift ended 10 minutes ago, but the floor was a disaster zone. My phone buzzed against my leg. I checked it, hoping for a message from my son. Instead, the screen lit up with a notification from Thea. Emergency. Need you in my office ASAP. System critical. My stomach dropped. Critical usually meant a fire, a lawsuit, or a total shutdown. I started walking toward the stairs, dreading whatever fresh hell awaited me. I took the stairs 2 at a time, heart hammering. I rehearsed explanations for power failures and supply shortages. When I burst into the admin suite, the air conditioning hit me like a wall of ice. Thea sat behind her desk, frowning at her laptop. She didn't look up. Eric, finally. She sighed, tapping a manicured nail on the screen. I can't get the color printer to default to double-sided. It's wasting paper. I stood frozen, my pulse pounding in my ears. I didn't scream, though I wanted to. I walked around the desk, pressed 3 buttons, and fixed the setting in 6 seconds. Done, I said, my voice flat. Thea nodded, already dismissing me. Thanks. Oh, come back Monday morning. We need to discuss the department's future. She waved a hand vaguely. Big changes. I walked out, wiping the grease off my hands. I told myself Monday would be the day they finally recognized the effort. I should have known better. I stood on the plush carpet of Thea's office, feeling like a grease stain on her pristine decor. She gestured to the chair opposite her, smiling a little too widely. It was Monday, the day of the big talk. Eric. She began, leaning forward with practiced intensity. That save on the packaging line Friday. Incredible. She let the compliment hang in the air like perfume. We need leadership like yours permanently in the director role. My chest tightened. Finally, the words I needed. She opened a folder, sliding a single sheet of paper toward me. It was a graph showing increased efficiency whenever I was shift lead. You're the glue, Eric. This department falls apart without you. I nodded, feeling a rare spark of pride cut through my skepticism. Does this mean the promotion is official? I asked. Thea waved her hand dismissively. It's practically a formality. We just need to finalize the structure. I want you to visualize yourself in that corner office starting next month. The door swung open without a knock. Avon strolled in, wearing a suit that cost more than my car, but fit him poorly across the shoulders. He didn't look at me. Mom, the synergy reports on the dashboard are lagging, he said, tapping a tablet aggressively. Thea's smile didn't falter, but her eyes tightened at the corners. Ivan, we're in a meeting. He shrugged, dropping into the chair beside me. Just saying. We need to optimize the vertical integration. Hey, Eric. The dashboard isn't lagging, I said, keeping my voice steady. It updates every 15 minutes to save server bandwidth. It is designed that way. Evan frowned, looking at the screen like it had insulted him personally. Seems inefficient. Real, time data is key for agility. He used words he'd heard on podcasts. Hollow and shiny. I saw Thea watching us, her gaze darting between my worn work boots and Evan's polished loafers. She wasn't judging his ignorance. She was calculating how to cover it. Thea cleared her throat, pulling focus back to her desk. Eric, I know things have been tight. With your son starting college soon, financial stability is paramount. She knew exactly which buttons to press. This promotion comes with a significant salary adjustment. It would solve a lot of problems for you. She let the implication land heavy and soft. It was a promise wrapped in a threat. If I wanted to pay that tuition, I had to play her game a little longer. I am in, I said. Whatever you need. Thea beamed, relief washing over her face. Excellent. Just keep doing what you do. Teach Evan the ropes this week. I stood to leave, feeling lighter than I had in years. But as I turned, I glanced at Evan's notepad. He wasn't taking notes on synergy or strategy. He had written down my daily login codes and the specific sequence I used to reboot the main server. A cold knot tightened instantly in my stomach. Wednesday morning arrived with the smell of burnt coffee and nervous sweat. The break room was packed tight, walls vibrating with the hum of the plant just beyond the doors. We stood shoulder to shoulder in our high-vis vests. I caught the eye of Heavy, set Mike from shipping. He gave me a discreet thumbs up and mouthed, about time. The rumor mill had been working overtime, convinced the big announcement was my long-awaited ascent. I adjusted my collar. For the first time in a decade, I allowed myself to hope. Thea walked to the front of the room, her heels clicking like a countdown clock against the linoleum. She stood on a small riser, looking out over the sea of tired faces with a predatory smile. Thank you all for gathering, she said, her voice projecting without a microphone. Today marks the beginning of a new era for Forge River. She paused for dramatic effect. I straightened my posture. Beside me, a younger tech whispered, "Finally getting you out of the trenches, Eric." I almost smiled. We need fresh vision to lead us into the future. Thea continued, her eyes sliding right past me to the door. Please join me in welcoming our new Senior Operations Director, Evan Quinn. The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't the respectful quiet of awe, it was the vacuum of oxygen leaving the room. A few polite claps started near the front, likely from admin staff who feared for their jobs. My stomach turned to lead. The thumbs up from Mike dissolved into a confused frown. Evan stepped up, smoothing a tie that was too bright for a factory floor. He grinned, seemingly immune to the thick tension. Thanks, Mom. I mean, Thea. He corrected quickly, though the damage was done. I'm stoked to synergize our workflows. He used his hands to make a vague box shape in the air. We're going to pivot to a cloud-based mindset for physical inventory. A murmur rippled through the warehouse crew. You can't put steel beams in a cloud. He had absolutely no clue. I didn't look at the floor. I looked straight at Thea. She met my gaze with a cold, unblinking stare. There was no apology in her eyes, only a challenge. She was daring me to make a scene, to validate her narrative that I was emotional or unprofessional. She knew about the tuition bills. She knew about the mortgage. She was banking on my desperation, keeping me silent. My hands balled into fists at my sides, nails digging into my palms until they stung. Evan grabbed the microphone again, oblivious to the hostility radiating from the crew. And a huge shout out to Eric. He said, pointing a finger at me like a pistol. He has agreed to stay on as my personal support lead to handle the boring stuff while I focus on big picture strategy. The room turned to look at me. It wasn't a promotion. It was a public demotion dressed up as teamwork. The applause was thin, scattered, and sounded more like polite confusion than celebration. I just stood there, burning. 1 week into Evan's reign, the plant felt less like a factory and more like a sinking ship. I stood near the loading dock, watching a logistical nightmare unfold. Trucks were backed up 3 deep because Evan had routed the intake schedule. He claimed he saw revolutionary flow model on a tech blog and implemented it without testing. The drivers were leaning on their horns, the sound echoing off corrugated metal. It was pure frustration. I rubbed my temples, already dreading the cleanup. The heavy air smelled of diesel fumes and impending failure. We can't offload until the outbound lane clears. The foreman yelled, waving a clipboard. But outbound is blocked because the new sorting algorithm flagged everything as low priority. I checked the scanner. Even had set parameters to batch process, meaning nothing moved until the bay was full. In a just-in-time facility, that was suicide. Override it manually. I ordered, grabbing a scanner myself. Get the steel moving before we halt the stamping press. The foreman hesitated, looking nervously toward the offices. Ivan said manual overrides are strictly forbidden. I marched to the admin suite. Ready to explain why the line was starving, Thea intercepted me in the hallway, holding a light like a shield. Eric, lower your voice, she hissed, guiding me away from Evan's glass, walled office. He is experimenting with lean dynamics. I pointed toward the window where trucks sat idling. He is creating a bottleneck that will cost us 20 grand by lunch. I need authorization to revert the intake protocol. Thea sighed, looking at me with pity. You are focusing on minutia again. It's not minutia, Thea. It's physics. I snapped. You can't fit 2 trucks in a 1-truck lane. She hardened her expression, stepping into my personal space. Trust his fresh vision, Eric. Your job is to support his strategy, not undermine it with old-school thinking. Just handle the details and let him steer the ship. She patted my arm, a gesture that felt more like a slap. Fix the traffic, but don't touch the algorithm. Make it work. She walked away, leaving me with an impossible order. By Thursday, the internal chaos bled outward. My phone rang with a number I recognized immediately. Our biggest steel supplier. Eric, who is this kid sending me emails? The account rep asked, his voice tight. He just tried to renegotiate our net 30 terms to net 90 in exchange for brand exposure. Is he joking? I closed my eyes, leaning against a vibrating support beam. It's a misunderstanding, Dave. Disregard it. I'll push the payment through today personally. I spent the next hour smoothing ruffled feathers, saving the contract. I kept the steel flowing, but the victory was short-lived. Late that afternoon, a company-wide email pinged on my phone. Subject: Strategic vendor win. It was from Evan. Thrilled to announce I've solidified our supply chain partnerships through aggressive negotiation. The text read: Thanks to my new terms, we are projected to save? Well, nothing, but relationships are stronger. He had taken my apology call and framed it as his boardroom victory. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my safety glasses. The audacity was breathtaking. I went to the safety station to update the lockout, tagout log, needing a mundane task to cool my blood. I pulled the master binder from the shelf, the one I had written from scratch 5 years ago. I flipped to the title page. My name was gone. In its place, in fresh bold ink, was authorized by Evan Quinn, Director of Operations. They hadn't just stolen the credit for the day, they were rewriting the history of the plant. They wanted to erase my fingerprints completely. It was nearly 9 p.m. on Tuesday when the silence finally settled over the plant floor. The machinery hummed in standby mode, a low vibration that rattled the loose vent above my desk. I wasn't there for overtime pay. I was there because Evan had entered the shift differentials backward. If I didn't fix it tonight, 40 workers would be short on their paychecks come Friday. I rubbed grit from my eyes and typed steadily, correcting the digital mess he left behind. The office wing was dark, save for a sliver of yellow light spilling from Thea's door. I finished the last entry and hit save, the progress bar crawling across the screen. My throat felt like I had swallowed sandpaper, so I headed toward the kitchenette for water. As I passed the administrative corridor, voices drifted out of Thea's cracked door. Usually, she guarded her privacy like a state secret, but exhaustion must have made her sloppy. I intended to walk past, but then I heard my name. It wasn't spoken with respect. It was spoken with the kind of casual dismissal you use for a broken stapler. I froze in the shadows. Eric isn't leadership material, Marcus. He's a wrench. Thea's voice was sharp, cutting through the quiet hallway. She was on speakerphone, likely with Marcus from the board. He is fantastic at grunt labor, but he lacks the sophisticated edge we need for the future. I leaned against the cold cinderblock wall, my breath hitching in my chest. But he's been running operations for years, Marcus countered, his voice tinny and distant. The numbers drop whenever he takes a vacation. Thea scoffed, a sound I knew well. That's just dependency, not skill. We are weaning the plant off him. Marcus paused on the line, the silence heavy with hesitation. If he leaves now, the transition fails. Are you sure he's secure? Thea laughed, a dry, confident sound that made my skin crawl. He won't leave. He can't. I've seen his financials. He has a kid heading to university and a mortgage he can barely cover. Eric is trapped by his own responsibilities. She said it like a victory. He will stay because he is terrified of instability. We have him exactly where we need him, working hard and keeping his mouth shut. Then a third voice chimed in from the corner of her office. Evan. I hadn't realized he was still in the building. Honestly, Mom, it's kind of sad, he said, sounding bored. He actually thinks he's mentoring me. It's like watching a golden retriever try to teach calculus. Thea murmured something soothing. Let him feel important, honey. It keeps him productive. Once you have the lingo down, we won't need his technical crutch anymore. They weren't just exploiting my labor, they were mocking my earnestness. The shame burned hotter than the anger. I should have walked away then, but I needed to hear the bottom of the well. Marcus sighed on the phone. What is the long-term timeline, then? Thea didn't hesitate. 6 months. Once Evan completes the certification cycle and the quarterly audit passes, we cut Eric loose. His salary is too high for a support role anyway. We can hire 2 juniors for what we pay him. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my boots. They weren't waiting for me to retire. They were fattening me up for the slaughter, planning to discard me the moment I finished training my replacement. I backed away slowly, ensuring my boots made no sound on the tile. I returned to my desk, where the screen still glowed with the completed payroll correction. I looked at the names of the workers I had just protected. Families who would get paid because I stayed late. Thea and Evan didn't care about them either. They only cared about the extraction of value. I picked up my bag, the leather strap heavy in my hand. The loyalty I felt for Forge River didn't die in that moment. It was murdered, and I finally had a body to mourn. I arrived at the plant an hour before shift start, the parking lot ghostly under the sodium lights. The silence inside felt different today, less like peace and more like a breath held before a scream. I didn't turn on my office lights. I simply opened my laptop and deleted my personal templates, the spreadsheets I'd built over 10 years that automated their chaos. I typed 3 sentences on a blank document. I resign effective immediately. Thank you. I printed it, the paper still warm, and walked toward Thea's office. Thea was already at her desk, aggressively misting a fern with a spray bottle. She looked up, annoyed by the interruption, expecting another status report she could ignore. I placed the white envelope on her blotter, right on top of the quarterly projections she loved so much. "What is this?" she asked, her voice tight. "A budget request." I shook my head, my pulse steady for the first time in months. "It's my notice, Thea. I'm done." She froze, the spray bottle dripping water onto her mahogany desk. She laughed, a brittle sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Okay, Eric. Point taken. You are stressed. We can discuss a bonus structure next quarter if you are feeling underappreciated." She slid the envelope back toward me without opening it. "Take the morning off. Go get a coffee. But be back for the 10 a.m. strategy sync." She picked up her pen, dismissing me. It was the same tactic she always used, treat my boundaries like suggestions. I didn't move. "It's not a negotiation," I said softly. "I am leaving." The pen stopped moving. She looked up, and the mask of benevolent leadership slipped. "You can't just leave, Eric. We are in the middle of a transition." Her voice rose, sharpening into a weapon. "You have responsibilities. We both know about the tuition bills. You need this salary. Walking away now is financial suicide, and frankly, it's irresponsible parenting." The audacity of using my son against me made my vision blur for a second. She wasn't worried about my finances. She was terrified of her own. "I'll figure it out," I said, my voice colder than the plant floor in winter. "But I won't stay somewhere that views me as a piece of furniture." Thea stood up, knocking her chair back. "You think you are indispensable. Everyone is replaceable, Eric. Especially you." She began pacing, her heels digging into the carpet. "If you walk out that door, don't expect a reference. I will make sure every firm in the district knows you abandoned a critical project midstream." "You'll be toxic." I shrugged. "Then I'll work out of the district." Her threats were empty. I knew too intimately how desperate they were. Seeing that intimidation failed, she pivoted instantly. "Look, maybe we pushed too hard," she said, her tone softening into fake concern. "I can authorize a 5% raise today, effective immediately. We can get you a title bump. Senior technical lead. How does that sound?" It sounded like desperation. "It sounds like too little, too late," I replied. "I am not negotiating a contract. I am exiting one." The door banged open, bouncing off the stopper. Evan stood there, face pale and sweating, holding a tablet like it was a bomb. "Mom." "Thea," he corrected, his voice cracking. The main hydraulic pressure gauge is flashing red. It's making a sound I've never heard before. He didn't even look at me. He was solely focused on his own panic. The manual says to release the valve, but I don't know which one it is. There are 3 of them. He looked like a child lost in a supermarket. Thea spun on me, pointing a finger at the door. Eric, go handle that. Now. It was a reflex command, assuming I was still her tool to wield. Evan looked at me, eyes wide with terror. Seriously, man, it's vibrating. You need to come look at it. The old instinct to run toward the fire twitched in my legs. I knew exactly which valve it was. It was a 10-second fix. If I didn't turn it, the system would trip and halt production for days. I looked at the panic on their faces and felt absolutely nothing. I can't help you, I said calmly. I am not authorized. You said it yourself, Thea. I am just a wrench. You need sophisticated leadership to handle this. Thea's face turned a shade of purple I'd never seen before. If you don't fix that machine, I am terminating you for cause insubordination, she screamed it, desperate to regain control. You are fired effective immediately, I smiled. Perfect, I said. Then I don't need to work my notice period. I turned my back on them. Thea was shouting into her phone, calling security or legal. It didn't matter. Evan was still standing in the doorway, paralyzed by a problem he claimed to understand. I walked past him, stepping into the hallway. Far down the corridor, the red alarm light pulsed against the walls, a silent heartbeat of coming disaster. I knew the hydraulic seal would blow in about 10 minutes. I walked through the exit doors into the morning sun and didn't look back. I spent the first morning sleeping in, waking up to silence instead of alarms. But the text messages started arriving by noon. Mike from shipping sent a picture of the main floor covered in hydraulic fluid. Yvonne tried to fix it with duct tape. The caption read, "The pump had blown, just as I predicted. Without the pressure regulator engaged, the seal ruptured, spraying hot oil across 3 active lines. Production hadn't just paused, it had died screaming." I looked at the photo, zooming in on the chaos. It wasn't my mess anymore. By Friday, the initial panic had mutated into a grinding halt. Avon decided to recover lost time by rewriting the shift roster. He ignored the union mandate regarding turnaround times, scheduling the night crew for double backs without overtime approval. I heard about it from my son, who saw the complaints flooding social media. The warehouse team didn't strike, they just followed the rules maliciously. They worked at the exact minimum speed contractually required. It was a slow motion rebellion. Pallets piled up like monuments to incompetence, blocking the fire exits. My phone rang on Tuesday, displaying a number I knew by heart. It was Dave, the steel supplier I had saved weeks ago. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that sounded like a hostage negotiation. "Eric, they're bouncing payments. The kid told me, net 90 is the new standard without asking. We're cutting them off." I deleted the voicemail without finishing it. It was strange to hear the dominoes falling from a distance. The silence in my kitchen was louder than the machinery ever was. Thea finally broke on the 10th day. She didn't call from the office line. She used her personal cell to bypass my screening. "Eric, we need to talk," she said, skipping the pleasantries. "Consulting basis. Triple your hourly rate. Just come in for 1 day to reset the logic controllers." Her voice was thin, stripped of the arrogance she wore like armor. "I can't do that. Thea," I said, chopping vegetables. "I am toxic, remember? I wouldn't want to infect the strategy." I hung up before she could beg. The industry is smaller than people think. Word traveled fast that Forge River couldn't fulfill orders. I sat on my porch, watching the rain, when an email pinned from a major client. They weren't asking about Forge River, they were asking for my availability. They knew who had actually been steering the ship. "We are moving our contract," the email read. "We need to know where you land so we can follow." It was the validation I had chased for a decade, arriving the moment I stopped running. The end came 2 weeks after I walked out. A friend in HR texted me the play. The board of directors showed up for a surprise compliance audit, sparked by the supplier complaints. They didn't go to the conference room. They went straight to the floor. They found Evan screaming at a forklift driver for moving too slow, while a conveyor belt behind him spat damaged parts onto the floor. Thea was frantically trying to hide a stack of cancellation notices in her briefcase. It was a perfect storm. Marcus, the board member I had heard on the phone, apparently didn't say a word at first. He just walked over to the main control panel, saw the red warning lights taped over with black electrical tape, and turned to Thea. "Is this the sophisticated edge you promised?" he asked. Thea tried to blame the workforce, tried to blame the union, tried to blame me. But the evidence was everywhere. You can't spin a story when the roof is literally leaking dirty oil onto your expensive Italian suit. Avon didn't handle the pressure well. According to the text thread, he threw his clipboard and yelled that the equipment was legacy junk. And the staff. Uncoachable. He threw a tantrum in front of the people who signed his checks. It was the final nail. Security was called not to escort the board out, but to escort the director of operations off the premises. They walked him out the side door, past the very workers he had insulted. I imagined the silence of the crew as they watched him leave. While Forge River burned, my phone rang again. It was the VP of their largest competitor, a woman named Sarah. "We heard you are a free agent," she said. "We've been trying to poach you for years, but Thea always said you weren't interested." The lie stung, but the offer she made washed it away. It wasn't a support role. It was director of logistics, with a salary that made my old mortgage worries look ridiculous. "We don't need a fixer," she said. "We need a leader." I signed the digital offer letter, sitting at my kitchen table. The news on the television muttered in the background about a local manufacturing dip, but I barely heard it. I looked at the calendar. My son's tuition was due in a month, and for the first time, the math worked easily. I didn't feel triumphant about Forge River's collapse. I just felt clean. The duct tape was gone. I poured a fresh cup of coffee, ready to build something that wouldn't fall apart the moment I turned my back. The convention center hummed with a different frequency than the plant floor. Here, the air was conditioned to a crisp chill, smelling of fresh carpet and expensive cologne. I adjusted my lapel pin, the silver logo of my new company catching the overhead lights. My team stood around me, 2 junior engineers waiting for my signal to start the demo. They didn't look terrified of a meltdown. They looked ready. "Director, the client from Detroit is here," one whispered. I smiled, feeling the strange, heavy weight of genuine respect. After the demo, I wandered toward the back of the hall where the booths were smaller and the lighting dimmer. The noise faded into a low murmur of desperate sales pitches. In a 10 by 10 space designated for a third-tier gasket supplier, a man sat slumped on a folding chair. His suit was wrinkled, the top button undone, and he stared blankly at a tablet. He looked older, smaller, and stripped of the arrogance that had once filled a room. It was Evan, hiding in the dark. He sensed eyes on him and looked up slowly. For a second, his face went slack with recognition. He scrambled to sit up straighter, knocking a stack of glossy brochures onto the floor. Eric, he breathed, the name coming out like a plea. There was no entourage, no buzzwords, no Thea to rewrite reality for him. Just a kid in a cheap booth, realizing he was exactly where his skills belonged. He looked at my director badge, then down at his own messy, cluttered table. I could have walked over. I could have asked him about synergy or vertical integration or how the hydraulic pumps were holding up. A year ago, the anger would have demanded it. But looking at him now, sweating under the halogen lights, I felt nothing. The fire that had burned in my gut for a decade was gone, replaced by a cool, quiet indifference. I didn't owe him a lesson anymore. Life had already taught him the only one that mattered. I gave him a single, sharp nod, not of forgiveness, but of finality. He was just a ghost from a dead life. Avon lowered his eyes, unable to hold the gaze, and started gathering the fallen brochures with trembling hands. I turned my back on the shadows and walked toward the main atrium. The noise of the expo swelled again, sounding less like chaos and more like opportunity. I wasn't the guy who fixed broken things anymore. I was the guy who built them. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Old reflexes made my pulse jump, expecting a crisis or a scream for help from a panicked floor manager. I pulled it out, bracing for disaster. It was a text from my son, grades posted. Dean's list again. Burgers tonight. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. On my way, I typed back. I holstered the phone, walked out the double doors into the afternoon sun, and finally, for the first time, went home on time.